The bobcat first appeared in the orchard just before dawn, sitting motionless in the spray of the irrigation sprinklers, as if it had chosen the coldest, strangest place possible to wait. At first, Elias Mercer thought it was a trick of the half-light. He was driving the eastern service lane of his family orchard in an aging utility cart, coffee in one hand, pruning gloves in the other, when the sweeping arcs of water caught a tawny shape between the rows of peach trees and turned it silver in the mist. He braked so abruptly the coffee sloshed onto his wrist. Out there, in the middle of the sprinkler line, a bobcat sat low on its haunches, soaked through, ears pinned slightly back, staring toward him with an intensity that made the morning feel instantly different. Wild animals did not sit in the irrigation unless something was very wrong. They slipped through the rows at dusk. They watched from the tree line. They vanished the second an engine approached. This one stayed. Mercer Ridge Orchard spread across 80 acres outside a small farming town in Central California, where the hills rolled gold in summer and the mornings smelled of wet earth, diesel, and fruit. Elias had run it for 13 years since his father's stroke, though the orchard had belonged to the family much longer than that. At 49, he had hands permanently roughened by ladders and wire, a deep tan that never really left, and the kind of practical mind built by weather reports, harvest schedules, and machinery that always chose the worst possible time to fail. He trusted what he could inspect and repair. If a line pressure dropped, there was a leak. If peaches were bruising early, the pickers needed retraining. If a bobcat was sitting in the middle of active sprinklers at 5:30 in the morning, then either it was injured or something in the orchard had pulled it badly out of its instincts. He cut the cart engine and listened. The orchard woke around him in layers, sprinkler heads ticking and hissing, water pattering against leaves, a distant hawk calling from the power lines, and somewhere beyond the western rows the low hum of a refrigerated truck on the highway. The bobcat did not move. It looked young but fully grown, maybe a small female, lean and long-legged, with dark spots ghosting across a wet, tawny coat and black ear tufts flattened by the spray. Its whiskers were beaded with water. Every few seconds it glanced away from Elias and toward the base of the nearest trellis post in the next row, then back at him again. "Well," Elias muttered to nobody, "you're a strange one." He did not get out right away. He reached first for the radio clip near the steering wheel. "Mina," he said when his niece answered from the packing shed, already sounding more awake than he felt. "You out front yet?" Mina Mercer was 26, his foreman in everything but title, and the only person at the orchard who could manage payroll, irrigation schedules, and a forklift before sunrise without seeming annoyed by any of it. "Just got here," she said. "What broke?" "Nothing yet," Elias replied, still staring at the bobcat. "But I've got a wildcat sitting in Block E like it pays rent." There was a pause. "A bobcat? That's the one." Another pause, then, "You want me to call Fish and Wildlife?" Elias watched the animal look again toward the next row. "Maybe. Come here first." By the time Mina arrived in her truck 3 minutes later, the sky had brightened from charcoal to pale blue-gray, and the orchard mist had thickened around the lower branches. She stepped out in rubber boots and a canvas jacket, took one look into the sprinkler row, and stopped short. That is definitely not normal. She was right. The bobcat had not moved 10 feet since Elias first saw it. It remained almost exactly where it had been, letting the water strike its back and sides, blinking through the spray, then shifting its gaze once more toward that same spot near the trellis base. "Looks hurt," Mina whispered. Elias studied it. "Maybe, but it keeps checking something." The bobcat rose then, to both their surprise, and trotted through the spray into the adjacent row. They expected it to disappear among the trunks. Instead, it stopped beside a cluster of waist-high weeds near the drip line, looked down at the ground, pawed once at the mud, then turned and looked back at them. Mina folded her arms tightly. "Okay, I don't like that." Elias did not answer because a thought, unwelcome and sharp, had just occurred to him. Poachers, trappers. It happened now and then at the edges of farm country, especially in the off-season, when trespassers figured no one was watching the outer blocks before daylight. Most were after rabbits, sometimes coyotes, sometimes anything unlucky enough to nose into bait. He had found old wire snares before along the dry creek that bordered the north fence. They had made him sick every time. He started walking. "Uncle Eli," Mina hissed, grabbing his sleeve. That's still a wild bobcat. I know what it is. He stepped slowly between the rows, boots sinking slightly in the wet berm. The bobcat backed away just enough to keep distance, then stopped again beside the weeds. It was not cornered, not crouched to spring, not showing teeth. It was waiting. That was the part he could not shake. When he reached the next row and parted the wet weeds with a rake handle lying on the berm, he saw metal. Not much at first, just a dull rectangle under a film of mud and grass clippings. Then the shape resolved, and Elias felt his stomach turn. A wire live trap, half hidden under cut brush, shoved low between the trunks where it would be invisible from the service lane unless you were almost on top of it. The orchard sprinklers had been running long enough that water now dripped steadily off its rusting mesh and pooled in the track below. Son of a... He stopped himself only because Mina was beside him now, and because the bobcat, suddenly tense again, had circled behind them and was staring hard at the trap. Mina's voice went thin. Is something in it? At first, Elias thought it was empty. Then he heard it, a faint metallic tremor, a tiny movement against wire. He dropped to one knee and pushed aside more wet weeds. Inside the trap, pressed so tightly into the back corner, it was nearly invisible against the shadowed mesh, was a bobcat kitten. No more than 7 or 8 weeks old, spotted and sodden, one foreleg tangled in a broken loop of thin cable tied crudely to the trap door as some sort of extra restraint. Its eyes reflected huge and terrified in the dim light. When Elias's hand brushed the cage, it gave a weak, cracked cry and tried to pull away, only to jolt against the cable and flatten itself harder into the rear mesh. Mina made a sound of pure shock and covered her mouth with both hands. Everything made sense at once, horribly and perfectly. Someone had set the cage illegally, probably baited for predators at the orchard's edge. The kitten had either wandered in alone or been dragged partly by the extra cable after the door tripped. The mother had found it, heard it, smelled it, and been unable to break wire or unlatch the trap. So she had stayed nearby. She had come into the sprinklers because they were impossible to ignore on the morning rounds. She had made herself visible in the one place Elias would stop and look. Not because she trusted him in any simple way, because desperation had left no better option. Call warden services, Elias said quietly, and Mina was already fumbling for her phone. And sheriff's office too. Tell them we've got an illegal trap on ag land. But even as she spoke into the phone, he knew the waiting would be too long. The kitten was cold, stressed, and tightened into the cable every time it panicked. The mother bobcat paced 3 circles around the trap, then backed off again into the sprinkler spray, watching every movement with eyes so fixed and urgent they made Elias's skin prickle. He had spent a lifetime around frightened animals, horses in wire, dogs with paws in gopher holes, calves born wrong side first in freezing rain. This was different. This animal was wild in every line of its body, yet still holding herself inside some invisible boundary, because the only path to her kitten ran through humans. Mina ended the call. Warden's 40 minutes out. Deputy, maybe 20. Elias looked at the cable around the kitten's foreleg. It doesn't have 20. Mina swallowed. What do you need? He held out a hand. Bolt cutters, leather gloves, the heavy tarp from the spray rig if you can carry it. She ran. Left alone 10 feet from the trap, Elias kept his body turned slightly sideways, trying to look less direct, less threatening, in the half-instinctive way people do around frightened things. The mother bobcat had moved back into the active sprinkler row again, water striking her shoulders as she sat. He understood suddenly that she had been there long before he arrived, keeping herself close despite the cold, because that was the nearest cover from which she could still watch the hidden cage. Every so often she made a low, rough sound toward the weeds, and from inside the trap the kitten answered with a thin, scratchy chirp. It was the smallest, saddest sound Elias thought he had ever heard in the orchard. Mina returned at a run with the cutters, gloves, and tarp, plus his ranch hand Joel Ramirez just behind her. Joel was 61, wiry and quiet, with a mustache gone mostly white, and the kind of unhurried competence Elias had relied on for a decade. He took in the trap, the pacing mother, the soaked kitten inside, and his expression hardened with a fury so controlled it became colder than shouting. "Somebody set that on our line?" he asked. Elias nodded once. Joel spat into the mud, not in disgust at the animals but at the person who had done this. Let's get that baby out. The rescue was suddenly a matter of precision. The trap door latch itself was rusted and swollen with mud, and the extra cable tied through the front mesh meant they could not simply spring it open without risking the kitten jerking backward and tightening the loop further around its foreleg. The mother bobcat had flattened herself low now, halfway between attack and retreat, making a deep vibrating sound in her chest whenever any hand neared the cage. Ilias respected that. He would have done worse in her place. He spread the tarp upright as a visual screen on one side so she would not have a direct line of sight to every motion. Not to deceive her exactly. There was no deceiving those eyes, but to reduce the panic edge of each metallic movement. Joel held the trap steady with gloved hands, while Elias worked the cutters carefully into the wire tie on the front restraint. Mina knelt just behind them, ready with a blanket-lined fruit crate in case they needed to contain the kitten briefly for its own safety. The first snip of the cutters made the kitten thrash, and the mother explode upward in a blur of wet muscle. She did not charge. She lunged 2 steps, stopped hard at the edge of the tarp, and gave a ripping snarl that tore through the sound of the sprinklers. Mina flinched back. Joel's jaw tightened. Elias, heart pounding painfully now, kept his voice as low as he could. "Easy, easy. We're trying." The kitten was panting, eyes wild. The cable tie had loosened but not cleared. One more cut, then a careful pull with the pliers Joel handed over. The loop slipped free of the foreleg and fell away. Relief came so fast Elias nearly missed the next problem. The trap door still would not lift. "Russ jammed the slide," Joel muttered. "Need pry." Mina darted back to the cart and returned with a flat bar from the tool bin. Elias wedged it under the swollen latch plate while Joel braced the cage. The mother bobcat had retreated again, but only just, her shoulders bunching and releasing as if every second of restraint cost her something. Water ran off her face and dripped from her whiskers. Ilias pressed the bar downward. Metal shrieked. The latch gave half an inch, then stuck. He pressed harder. Suddenly the plate snapped free and the front door swung open. Nobody moved. The kitten remained frozen in the back corner, too terrified to understand escape. Joel eased the cage angle slightly upward so it would not have to cross the front lip. "Come on, little thing," he murmured. The mother made another rough calling sound from beyond the tarp. At that, the kitten lurched forward, stumbled, and nearly fell out through the opening. Mina was quicker than any of them. She caught it in the blanket with both hands just as its bad foreleg buckled beneath it. It was lighter than fruit, lighter than it had any right to be. Mostly bones, wet fur, and panic. "Got it," she gasped. The mother bobcat was already moving. "Set it down," Elias said immediately, and Mina did, lowering the blanket bundle into the shallow fruit crate on the ground beside the trees. Everyone backed away at once, taking the tarp with them to open the view. For one suspended second, the mother stood motionless in the misting rows, looking from the humans to the crate. Then she came in low and fast, not a charge at them, but a direct line to the kitten. She reached the crate, pressed her face into the blanket, and a sound came out of her that silenced even the sprinklers in Elias's mind. A rough, throaty murmur so full of relief and urgency, it barely seemed like an animal sound at all. The kitten answered, tiny, cracked, but alive. Mina had tears running freely down her face now, though she seemed not to notice. Joel removed his cap and stood with it in both hands. Elias felt something twist hard behind his ribs as the mother licked the kitten's face, neck, shoulders, and the irritated foreleg again and again, cleaning, checking, counting it back into the world by touch. He had seen cows lick calves to life after hard births. He had seen dogs search burning outbuildings for pups. But there was something about the complete wrongness of the place. Orchard mud, stolen trap, sprinklers ticking, 3 stunned humans standing in wet dawn, that made this reunion feel almost unbearable to witness. Then a new problem surfaced. When the mother tried to pick the kitten up by the scruff, it cried sharply and twisted, the sore foreleg dragging under its chest. She stopped at once, tried a different angle, and got the same result. Elias frowned. "Leg's not right," Joel nodded grimly. "Maybe cable strain." Mina looked toward the road where the deputy should eventually appear. "Do we wait?" Elias looked at the mother. She had turned to face them again, body low beside the crate, eyes burning with that same unsurrendered need. Not done. Not solved. He knew then with uncomfortable certainty that she would not abandon the kitten, but he also did not know whether she could move it safely. The first vehicle to arrive was not the deputy, but Warden Claire Donnelly in a mud-spattered state truck, 15 minutes faster than promised. Claire was in her 40s, sun-browned, clear-eyed, and carried the quiet authority of someone who had spent years walking into situations where everyone else arrived too late. She crossed the berm at a crouch, took in the illegal trap, the mother bobcat beside the crate, and the humans frozen in a respectful semicircle, and said under her breath, "Well, that's one for the books." Elias gave the shortest version possible. She listened without interrupting, though her eyes never left the mother. When he mentioned the bobcat sitting in the sprinklers to be seen, Claire only nodded once, as if she had heard stranger things and believed them on the spot. "Let's not push our luck," she said. "But yes, she brought your attention here." Claire examined from a distance first using binoculars, though the kitten was only yards away. Minor foreleg compression or strain, not visibly broken. Good color in the paw. Responsive. If we force intake now, we risk losing the mother for reunion. If the mother can transport after a short rest, wild care is best. She opened her truck and took out a low-padded transfer tray. Not a closed trap, just something shallow and stable. We give them a calmer surface and room. Mina helped slide the tray beside the crate while everyone else backed farther off. The mother watched every inch of that movement, but did not flee. When the kitten was gently repositioned onto the tray, using the blanket under Claire's direction, the mother immediately resumed grooming, more slowly now, concentrating around the sore foreleg. The deputy arrived then, followed by one of Claire's field assistants, and the trap itself became evidence. Photos were taken. Boot prints in the mud near the fence line were marked. Joel led the deputy toward the North Service Road, where the trespass cut had likely been made. All of it mattered, Elias knew. Whoever had set that cage needed more than a warning. But his attention kept being pulled back to the tray under the peach trees, where the mother bobcat crouched over the kitten, and the orchard sprinklers kept spinning their silver arcs around them, as if dawn had not changed everything. After nearly 10 minutes, the kitten seemed stronger. It shifted under the mother's chin, and even tried weakly to stand. Claire exhaled softly. "That's better." The mother tested the scruff again, adjusting with exquisite care to avoid the foreleg. This time the kitten only gave a faint protest and hung still. Very slowly the mother lifted it. Elias did not realize until then how tightly he had been clenching his jaw. She carried the kitten 3 steps, paused, set it down, licked the foreleg once more, then lifted again and moved toward the brush line beyond the last orchard row. Nobody made a sound. Nobody moved. At the edge of the irrigation block, where the peach rows gave way to wild blackberry and dry creek grass, the mother stopped and looked back. Elias would later refuse to describe that look in any sentimental way. He did not think wild things owed people gratitude, and he had no wish to make the animal smaller by pretending he understood her fully. But he knew she had chosen visibility over fear because her kitten was trapped. He knew she had stayed in the cold spray so the morning rounds would find her. He knew she had returned to the orchard's human patterns because every instinct that should have kept her hidden had been overruled by need. Whatever was in that backward glance, it held all of that. Then she turned and vanished into the creek brush, with the kitten against her chest. The orchard felt strangely empty after she was gone. The sprinklers were shut off late because no one wanted to walk back into the row too soon. Mina stood with her wet hair sticking to her cheek, still holding the blanket they had used for the kitten. "I can't believe that happened," she said at last. Elias looked at the ruined trap in the mud. "I can." She turned to him. "You can?" He nodded toward the creek line where the bobcat had disappeared. "A mother with no other way left?" "Yeah, I can." The rest of the day moved around the incident without ever really leaving it behind. Deputies found tire tracks near the north fence and one cut section of wire where someone had come in after midnight. Claire collected the trap and cable for evidence and promised she would set a camera near the creek in case the kitten needed follow-up. Mina called the crew together and went over perimeter checks with a level of intensity that made even the oldest hands listen like new hires. Joel repaired the fence himself before lunch without being asked, and Elias, who usually returned to irrigation charts and shipping calls by 7, spent an unreasonable amount of time walking the orchard edges, not because more work needed doing, but because the whole place felt altered. Still peach trees and mud and line pressure and ladders, but threaded now with the knowledge of what had moved just beside its routines. 3 nights later, Claire sent him a motion camera image from the creek brush beyond Block E. In the blue-gray infrared glow, the mother bobcat stood half-turned toward the camera, while 2 kittens moved around her paws. One was slightly smaller and held its left foreleg a little stiffly, but it was standing and alive. Elias stared at the image long enough that Mina finally reached over his shoulder to see what had gone silent on his desk. When she did, she made the same soft, broken laugh she had made in the orchard that morning. "Worth shutting down irrigation for," she said. Elias printed the image and pinned it to the corkboard in the packing shed beside fertilizer invoices and the week's harvest chart. No one took it down. After that, the crew began joking that the orchard had a new rule. Always pay attention when something wild wants to be seen. But the joke never entirely covered the seriousness beneath it. Trap patrols increased. Fence lines were checked at dawn and dusk. The county followed through with charges when a local predator control contractor turned out to be setting illegal cages off the books on several farms outside town. Claire testified. Elias did too, and each time he was asked to explain how the trap had been found, he kept it as plain as he could. "A bobcat sat in the middle of the orchard sprinklers until I stopped. Then she led me to the cage." People wrote that down with faces that suggested they did not quite know what to do with it. Elias did not care. It was the truth. In later weeks, on certain mornings, when the light came low and silver through the wet rows, he found himself glancing instinctively toward Block E. He never saw that mother in the sprinklers again. Once, near harvest, he thought he caught a tawny shape slipping along the creek edge with 2 half-grown kittens behind it. But by the time he stopped the cart, the brush was still. Maybe it was her, maybe not. The certainty mattered less than the memory, because he knew now that on one cold dawn, a wild mother had exhausted every answer available to her in the world beyond the orchard fence, and then stepped straight into human machinery, water lines, service roads, morning rounds, until someone finally noticed where she wanted them to look. And because of that, a hidden cage became visible, a stolen trap became evidence, and one small life came back out of the wire and into the light.